The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air, mingling with the quiet hum of the hospital's fluorescent lights. Zephyr Vandorne sat rigid in his private suite, his grip tightening on the crisp white sheets beneath his fingers. His entire world had been reduced to the cold, clinical walls around him. Across the room, Dr. Mina adjusted his glasses, his face a mask of practiced neutrality, but his words carried the weight of a hammer striking stone. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Terminal. 6 months at most. The words barely registered. They floated in the space between them, absurd and impossible. Zephyr Vandorne did not die. He conquered, he dominated, he built empires from dust. He was a force of nature, a man who bent the world to his will. And yet, here he was, sentenced to death. He exhaled slowly, as if trying to push the reality of it out with his breath. No, the word was quiet, but laced with steel. That's impossible. I feel fine. Dr. Mina sighed. He had seen this before, powerful men crumbling under the weight of their own mortality. We ran the tests twice. I'm sorry, Mr. Vandorne, but it's best you start preparing. Zephyr's fingers curled into fists. Prepare? How did a man like him prepare for annihilation? He had spent 55 years clawing his way to the top, ruthless, relentless, undefeated. His name was etched into the foundations of the world's most powerful corporations. His wealth could buy nations, yet now, it could not buy him another year. He could already picture them, the wolves circling, the greedy relatives, the opportunistic investors, waiting for him to fall. They would tear apart his empire, his fortune, everything he had spent decades building. Because he had no heir. His breath came shallow, uneven. In all his years of acquiring power, he had never stopped to secure his legacy. He had no wife, no child, no one to inherit his empire. The Vandorne name, once a symbol of dominance, would die with him. There must be something you can do, he growled, his voice raw. Dr. Mina hesitated. We can manage the pain. Make you comfortable. Zephyr slammed his fist on the bedside table. The water glass trembled, spilling across the polished wood. I don't want comfort. I want a cure. Silence. And in that silence, for the first time in decades, Zephyr Vandorne felt powerless. The drive home was a blur. The city skyline stretched endlessly outside his limousine window, but it might as well have been a graveyard. Everything he had built, the skyscrapers, the power, the control, was meaningless now. By the time he stepped into his mansion, the weight of what he had to do pressed against his chest. His world could not end like this. His name could not vanish into the void. He needed an heir. Now. As he walked through the dimly lit corridors, his thoughts were interrupted by the soft clinking of glass. In the grand dining hall, Seraphine, his housemaid, was setting down a tray of freshly squeezed juice. She had been with him for 8 years, loyal, unwavering, never once betraying his trust. His gaze lingered on her. Something in his chest tightened. A plan began to form, a desperate, unthinkable plan. Seraphine turned to him, her expression soft with concern. Sir? Are you all right? Zephyr inhaled sharply, his heart pounding. Seraphine, he murmured, his voice low, I need you to give me a child. The amber glow of the chandelier flickered against the marble floors as Zephyr Vandorne sat in his vast, empty study, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. The world outside was silent, yet his mind roared with chaos. The diagnosis had been delivered, cold and final, a death sentence disguised as medical advice. 6 months. That was all the time he had left before his empire crumbled into dust. For the first time in decades, he felt something unfamiliar, powerlessness. His billions meant nothing to death. His influence couldn't buy him more time. And what haunted him most, no heir, no legacy, no name to carry on what he had built with blood and fire. His vast fortune, his kingdom of steel and glass, would be devoured by soulless investors and ravenous relatives, men and women who had never lifted a single brick but would eagerly strip his empire to the bone. No. He wouldn't let that happen. A solution had already taken root in his mind, though it clawed at the edges of reason, demanding to be voiced. He needed a child. Now. A knock at the door pulled him from his storming thoughts. "Sir, your tea." The voice was soft, familiar. Seraphine. She stepped inside, carrying a silver tray with delicate movements, her presence as composed as always. For 8 years, she had been in this house, silent as a shadow, graceful as the autumn wind. She never pried, never faltered, never sought to exploit his wealth or power. She was, in a way, the only person he had ever truly trusted. Zephyr watched as she set the tea down on the edge of his desk, her dark eyes flickering toward him with quiet concern. "Are you unwell, sir?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. He exhaled through his nose, setting the untouched whiskey aside. His fingers pressed together as he studied her, the weight of his next words pressing against his chest. It was madness. And yet, it was the only thing that made sense. "Seraphine," he said, his voice low but steady, "I need you to give me a child." The room seemed to shrink in an instant. Seraphine froze, her fingers tightening against the edge of the tray. Slowly, almost cautiously, she lifted her gaze to meet his. "Sir, what did you just say?" Zephyr leaned forward, his sharp, piercing eyes locking onto hers. "I want you to bear my child." Her breath hitched. The air in the room turned thick, suffocating. She took an instinctive step back, as if distance could protect her from the sheer weight of his words. Had she misheard him? Had grief twisted his thoughts into something irrational, impossible? "Sir, I don't understand." He exhaled, pressing his palms together, his jaw tight. "You are the only person I trust. You've been in this house for years, and not once have you betrayed me. Not once have you stolen, lied, or sought to use me. That makes you the only person I can entrust with this." Seraphine shook her head, her heart hammering against her ribs. "But why me? You could have anyone." "Because I don't want just anyone." Zephyr's voice cut through the air like a blade. A heavy silence followed. She saw it then. Beneath his cold, commanding demeanor, beneath the ruthless businessman the world knew, there was a man who was afraid. Afraid of dying forgotten. Afraid of leaving nothing behind. His hands, usually so steady, clenched into fists against the desk. He was desperate. And he was asking her. Her. Seraphine took another step back, shaking her head. "Sir, I can't. He cut her off. "You won't have to love me. This isn't about that. It's about legacy. I will take care of you for the rest of your life. You will never lack for anything. And neither will the child." Her breath was shallow, her hands trembling at her sides. This was beyond anything she had ever imagined. "Please, Seraphine." That single word made her blood run cold. Zephyr Vandorne was not a man who begged. Not to investors, not to kings, not to fate itself. But here he was, staring at her with pleading eyes, his voice raw with urgency and fear. And for the first time in her life, Seraphine realized something terrifying. She had the power to change his fate. Silence stretched between them like a thin glass wall, fragile and on the verge of shattering. Seraphine felt the weight of Zephyr's words pressing down on her, suffocating, filling the room with a tension so thick she could hardly breathe. She took a step back, her legs unsteady. "Sir, I don't understand," she whispered, though in truth, she understood perfectly. Zephyr stood before her, his piercing blue eyes unwavering, filled with something she had never seen before, desperation. I need an heir, Seraphine, he repeated, his voice firmer this time. And I want you to be the mother of my child. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest. A chill ran through her veins, but not from fear, something deeper, something far more unsettling. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling at her sides. Sir, she hesitated, her throat tightening as she forced herself to speak. I've never been with a man before. For the first time since she had met him, Zephyr Vandorne looked truly, utterly shocked. His lips parted slightly as if trying to form words, but none came. He had assumed she had loved before, that she had known the touch of a man, that she had choices in this world beyond servitude. Seraphine forced herself to continue, her voice barely above a whisper. I am a virgin. A flicker of something unreadable passed through Zephyr's gaze, guilt, hesitation, regret. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the hardened resolve of a man whose time was running out. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead as if trying to steady himself. Seraphine, I know this is sudden. And I know this is a lot to ask. He met her gaze once more, the raw honesty in his eyes making her breath catch. But I don't have time. I need someone I can trust, and there is no one I trust more than you. Seraphine's mind raced, tumbling through memories of the life she had lived in this house. 8 years. 8 years of watching this man from the shadows, of serving his every need, of witnessing his victories and his losses, his moments of ruthless ambition and rare, fleeting kindness. And now, this. Her stomach twisted. She could barely comprehend what he was asking of her. A child. Not a contract. Not a business transaction. A life. A future. She thought of the way she had been raised. The lessons whispered into her ears since childhood. A woman's virtue is her most precious gift. Love must come before desire. Marriage before motherhood. And yet, here she was, standing before a man who had never begged for anything in his life, pleading for something that no amount of money or power could buy. She clenched her hands into fists, trying to ignore the burning in her chest. Sir, why me? She asked, her voice barely holding steady. Zephyr stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, his gaze locked onto hers. Because you're the only one who's ever been honest with me. You've never taken from me. You've never tried to manipulate me. You've given me something no one else ever has, loyalty. Seraphine's throat tightened. Loyalty. It had been the foundation of her life. The one thing she had held on to when she had nothing else. Zephyr continued, his voice gentler now. You've been in this house for almost a decade. You've seen me at my best and my worst, and yet, you stayed. Not for money, not for power, but because you are good, Seraphine. And that is exactly the kind of mother I want for my child. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This was too much. Too much to process. Too much to accept. She turned away, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. I need time. Zephyr didn't stop her. He simply nodded, though the flicker of desperation never left his eyes. Take all the time you need, he murmured. Just don't take too long. Because time was the one thing he didn't have. The mansion was suffocating. Not with heat or smoke, but with something far heavier, expectation. For days, Seraphine had done everything in her power to avoid him. She scrubbed the floors longer than necessary, rearranged bookshelves that were already perfect, and volunteered for errands she normally dreaded. Anything to keep from being alone with him. But it didn't matter. No matter where she went, she could feel his presence. In the distant echo of his footsteps. In the heavy silence at dinner. In the way his gaze lingered on her whenever she entered a room. He never repeated his request, never demanded an answer, but the weight of his words from that night still clung to her like a phantom. I need you to give me a child. The words haunted her. She wanted to run. She wanted to pretend she had never heard them. But every time she thought of Zephyr, his tired eyes, his slumped shoulders, the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was looking, she felt something new. Guilt. And something even worse. Pity. That evening, as the last golden light of the sun filtered through the grand estate, Seraphine found herself walking towards his study. She told herself she was just going to check on him, nothing more. But deep down, she knew the truth. Her heart pounded as she stopped in front of the door. She hesitated, her fingers curling into her palm. Then, she knocked. Come in. His voice was hollow, empty of its usual power. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, save for the dim light of the fireplace. Zephyr sat at his desk, hunched over, his head in his hands. The man who once commanded industries, boardrooms, and empires now looked like nothing more than a lost soul drowning in shadows. Seraphine swallowed. Sir. Zephyr looked up. The moment their eyes met, her breath caught in her throat. He was tired, not just physically, but in a way that seeped into the soul. The weight of his impending death hung on him like chains, dragging him deeper into despair. But worse than the exhaustion was the defeat in his gaze. He thought she had come to reject him. She didn't know why that realization made her chest tighten. Zephyr leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. I'm sorry if I've made you uncomfortable, Seraphine. I don't know what else to do. His voice was barely above a whisper. And for the first time in 8 years, he looked small. Something inside her cracked. This was a man who had once ruled without fear, who had never asked for anything. But now, he was a dying man begging for something only she could give. She had always seen him as untouchable, immortal. But he wasn't. He was just a man, afraid to be forgotten. She took a deep breath. Her next words would change everything. If I say yes, what happens next? The moment she spoke, hope flickered in his eyes, so brief, so fragile, she thought she had imagined it. But then, he sat up, as if life had been breathed back into him. I'll take care of you, Zephyr said immediately. I'll put everything in writing. You and the child will inherit everything. You will never have to worry about anything ever again. Seraphine's pulse raced. He was offering her the world. Security. Wealth. A future free from struggle. But that wasn't what made her heart pound. It was the way he looked at her, like she was his last chance at redemption. She exhaled shakily. Okay, sir. I'll do it. For a second, Zephyr didn't move. He just stared at her, as if trying to convince himself that he had heard correctly. Then, for the first time in weeks, he smiled. It was small, almost imperceptible. But it was real. Seraphine's chest tightened. Had she just made the biggest mistake of her life? She didn't know. But she did know one thing, there was no turning back now. Seraphine stood by the grand window of Zephyr's estate, her hands resting gently on her swollen belly. Outside, the vast gardens stretched endlessly, bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun. She had always loved this hour, the way the sky melted into hues of crimson and amber, the way the wind whispered through the leaves. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, she felt trapped between two worlds, the past she once knew and the uncertain future she was walking into. She heard him before she saw him. The steady yet slightly uneven sound of his footsteps, the subtle clearing of his throat. Even without turning around, she knew Zephyr Vandorne was watching her. You should be resting, his voice, though softer than usual, still carried its signature authority. Seraphine turned to face him. He looked weaker. His once powerful frame had begun to wear the weight of his illness. His face, once sharp and commanding, now held the quiet exhaustion of a man who had been fighting too long. "I can't sleep," she admitted. "Too much on my mind." Zephyr exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Is it regret?" The question hung between them, heavy and unspoken for too long. Seraphine held his gaze, searching for an answer within herself. Was it regret? The idea had terrified her at first. The weight of her decision had seemed unbearable. But regret? No. She had long since made peace with her choice. What unsettled her wasn't what she had done, but what she was starting to feel. "No," she whispered. "Not regret." Zephyr stepped closer, his movements slower than before but still carrying that quiet power. "Then what is it, Seraphine?" She hesitated. How could she put it into words? That somewhere between the cold, calculated arrangement they had agreed upon, something had shifted? That she no longer saw him as just a dying man? That every morning when he whispered to their child, when he traced his fingers over the curve of her stomach as if memorizing it, when he looked at her with something far too deep to be mere gratitude, her heart had begun to betray her? "You speak to him every morning," she finally said. "You tell him stories. You promise him things. You..." She paused, her throat tightening. "You love him already, don't you?" Zephyr's expression softened. He let out a slow breath and nodded. "I do." His hand reached out, hesitantly at first, but then with quiet confidence, resting over hers on her stomach. "He is the best thing I will leave behind." Something inside Seraphine cracked open at his words. She had never seen Zephyr plead before. He was a man who commanded, conquered, and took what he wanted. But now? Now he was just a father who wanted to live long enough to see his child's face. Her throat tightened as she whispered, "And me?" Zephyr froze. His eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite name. A battle of emotions raged behind his gaze, fear, hesitation, something dangerously close to longing. "Seraphine." His voice was hoarse, unsteady. "You weren't supposed to matter to me." Her breath caught in her throat. "But you do." The confession was quiet, almost reluctant, as if he hadn't meant to say it aloud. But it was too late. The words had been spoken, and now they loomed between them, undeniable. Seraphine's heart pounded. This wasn't part of the plan. She was supposed to give him an heir, not her heart. And yet, when Zephyr reached up to cup her face, his fingers trembling against her skin, she didn't pull away. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she whispered. A sharp breath escaped Zephyr's lips. His thumb traced slow, careful circles against her cheek, as if memorizing her. He was staring at her like she was something precious, something fleeting, a moment he wanted to capture before it was lost. "You have no idea," he whispered, "how much I love you, Seraphine." She let out a shaky breath, feeling something deep and irreversible shift inside her. This wasn't about duty anymore. This was about love. Love, in its most tragic and beautiful form, one that came too late, yet burned too deep to ignore. The evening sun cast a golden glow over the grand estate as Seraphine sat beside Zephyr Vandorne, gently cradling one of their newborn sons. The room was silent except for the soft breathing of the twins and the faint rustling of the curtains as a breeze swept through the open balcony doors. Zephyr, once a man of unbreakable power, now looked fragile, his once strong hands trembling as he held their second child against his chest. Yet, despite the weakness in his body, his eyes shone with something more powerful than illness, love. Seraphine watched him, her heart aching at the sight. "You should rest, Zephyr." He smiled, shaking his head weakly. "I don't want to waste a second, Seraphine. I want them to know me, even if it's only for a little while." Tears burned the back of her eyes, but she forced a smile. "They already know you. They know your voice, your warmth. They know they are loved." Zephyr exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting between his sons. "They are perfect," he murmured. "Stronger than I ever was. They will build a greater empire than I did. They will have more than just my name. They will have my heart." Seraphine's grip tightened around his hand. "And they will always know how much you loved them." He looked at her then, his expression shifting, as if he were memorizing every detail of her face. "And they will always have you." Her breath hitched. "Zephyr, don't talk like that." But he only smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "I've lasted longer than the doctors predicted," he said, "long enough to see their faces, to hold them in my arms. That's all I prayed for. And I got it." Seraphine shook her head, her throat tightening. "No, you're going to keep fighting. You have to." Zephyr gently shifted one of the babies into her arms, his fingers brushing against her hand. "I fought, Seraphine. For you. For them. And now. I just need you to promise me one thing." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Anything. Raise them to be good men. Strong, but kind. Teach them to love, to lead not with power, but with honor. And tell them." He paused, closing his eyes for a moment before opening them again, his voice softer now. "Tell them that their father loved them more than anything in this world." A tear slipped down Seraphine's cheek. "I swear it, Zephyr. I swear." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Zephyr leaned his head back against the chair, exhaustion weighing on him. The babies stirred, making tiny noises, and Seraphine instinctively rocked them, her heart hammering in her chest. Then she noticed it. Zephyr's breathing had slowed. His eyelids fluttered, his grip on her hand loosening. "Zephyr," she whispered, her voice shaking. He didn't respond. "Zephyr," she cried, her hands clutching his arms, her heart pounding. "Wake up, please." But he remained still. Peaceful. As if he had merely drifted into sleep. A sob tore from her throat as the truth crashed into her. He was gone. Her world crumbled in an instant. "No, no, no, please, Zephyr," she wept, shaking his hand as if she could will life back into him. "You said you would stay. You said you would fight." The twins stirred in her arms, their tiny cries filling the heavy silence. Even in death, Zephyr had held on to them, keeping them safe. Seraphine pressed her forehead against his, her tears soaking his skin. "You got your wish, Zephyr. You held your sons. But I still need you. They still need you." The wind blew gently through the room, rustling the curtains, as if whispering his name. She pulled back, looking at his face, serene, at peace. He had gone knowing his legacy would live on. That his children would have love, not just wealth. That they would have her. Swallowing the pain threatening to consume her, Seraphine took a shaky breath and cradled the twins close. "I will take care of them, Zephyr. I promise." And though her heart felt shattered beyond repair, she knew one thing for certain. Zephyr Vandorne's love would never fade. Even in death, Zephyr Vandorne's love remained, in the tiny hands of his sons, in the promise Seraphine made, and in the legacy he left behind. Broken Heart Sparkles' his final wish was fulfilled, but was it truly enough? Would his children ever feel the warmth of the father they never got to know? What do you think about Zephyr's decision? Was it selfish, or was it an act of pure love? Share your thoughts in the comments. Speech Balloon, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification bell for more emotional stories like this.